Everybody, Drew Dinkmeyer here doing my Week 5 cash game lineup review. I'll go through the decisions that I made on Fanduel and DraftKings and cash games. We'll start with where we always start, with the projections, which are the basis and the foundation for all of my decision making on a weekly basis. These are the projections over at DailyRoto that Mike Leone and I work on all week, and they really lead me in my play. We'll start looking at Fanduel. I ran 3 lineups on Fanduel. I ran 3 lineups on DraftKings. Ultimately, really was going to run 2 lineups on Fanduel, and then got a little bit nervous and made a bad decision. What I think is a bad decision, not only in retrospect, but just in terms of when I think of ways that I'm hedging lineups. This was not one of the ways that I usually do it. So the quarterback position is where we'll start. And quarterback, one of the things you can note is almost all quarterbacks are underpriced on both sites relative to their projections. Like, you know, the top flight quarterback is almost always going to outproject the top flight running back, and they're usually cheaper. And as a result, you have less dispersion amongst the quarterbacks as well. And so often you can pay down at quarterback in cash games to allow yourself to spend up a little bit more on the skill position players. And that certainly looked like that was going to be the case this week, with Blake Bortles really cheap at 7,000. There were some other guys in the low 7,000s like Derek Carr as well, whose team had a higher implied total, but he doesn't have any rushing equity. And he has to share a little bit more of the touchdown equity because he's got Marshawn Lynch, whereas Blake Bortles only had TJ Yeldon with Leonard Fournette out. So it looks like it was going to be a pay down at quarterback week, especially when you looked over at running back, where the top values, there is some big dispersion here. We had 5 guys with basically 3.5 plus value, and then everybody else, you know, kind of fairly priced, except a small tier of guys here. So the only 5 running backs I was considering for cash games were Todd Gurley, Christian McCaffrey, Melvin Gordon, James Conner, and Joe Mixon. Those were my 5 and my cutoff point. Wide receiver, again, a lot of the top price players are the best values, but less gap here than the running back spot. So wide receiver is probably going to be a position that I look to save a little bit of salary. Tight end, another position where there was not a ton of dispersion amongst the values. There are a couple guys up here that are like 2 points better than everybody else. And the one that really stood out was Vance McDonald at 4,600, just $100 above the minimum. McDonald was a huge disappointment, but for me was a cash game lock as part of the team with the highest implied total on the slate and just above the min at a position that had no standout plays. This salary relief allowed you to get the running backs that you wanted on the slate and the running backs who ultimately led the scoring. So nothing I would change about Vance Donald on FanDuel after that decision, even though it didn't go well. At the defense spot, the Tennessee Titans were, 2 points better than everybody else from our projections in terms of value. So they were going to be my cash game defense. Nothing I would change there either. I mean, Buffalo takes a ton of sacks. Josh Allen is mistake prone. What happened here that worked against Tennessee is Tennessee's offense couldn't do anything, and as a result, Buffalo was able to play from ahead. And when Buffalo is able to play from ahead and hide their quarterback, you just don't get as many opportunities, and the game played very slow. So nothing I would change about my Tennessee decisions. But let's look into those 3 lineups. The first lineup that I created was a cash game winner at 146.4 over on FanDuel. Blake Bortles at quarterback, James Conner, Joe Mixon, Juju Smith-Schuster, Tywan Taylor, Robert Woods, Vance McDonald, Todd Gurley, and the Titans defense. Had enough from the main plays to overcome the duds from Tywan Taylor at 2.5 and Vance McDonald at 1.1. McDonald was universally owned, so that one really didn't hurt. But Tywan at only 24%. This one really put me behind the 8 ball. Thankfully, Joe Mixon at 9%. I thought he was severely undervalued, and we had already discounted his projection for not getting full workload. And Sunday morning, news reports came out that Joe Mixon probably wouldn't get his normal workload, and then they activated Thomas Rawls, and we were kind of talking about it in our Slack, and we basically said, look, we've already discounted Joe Mixon. We've already gotten him down to like 65% of the market share of carries. I can't realistically go any lower, and he's this touchdown favorite at home with a high implied total, and he's 7,100. He's really cheap. So I was confident in Joe Mixon, especially in tournaments, but at this price on FanDuel, confident enough to deploy him in cash games. Ultimately, Robert Woods was kind of the differentiator here. 2% owned, nobody played him. These Rams wide receivers have all projected really well for us. He was the lone one left at the end of the game as both Cooper Kupp and Brandon Cooks got hurt. So a little bit of good luck there. Gurley went nuts, 58% owned, probably still not enough. I think paying for the 3 running backs made a ton of sense, and James Conner at 37% owned was also, one of the leaders at the position. So Blake Bortles, 21% owned at 7K. I really thought this was the way to build on FanDuel. It gave you all the access to the top running backs. The difference between my second FanDuel lineup and the first is I have Christian McCaffrey over Joe Mixon, and as a result, I dropped down from Robert Woods to Tyler Boyd. And obviously that cost me because Mixon outperformed McCaffrey and Woods outperformed Taiwan. This one just snuck across the cash line in this game, but was not a big winner on the whole on the slate because, 49th percentile, you're kind of leaving it up to fate in fate's hands whether you can beat the rake or not. But that's just a 2v2. Again, these were the 2 lineups I was going to run. Very last second on FanDuel, I got very nervous about Blake Bortles, and this was one where emotion kind of got the best of me. I had played Bortles the week before very unsuccessfully, or the last time that he had played without Leonard Fournette, and I just got a little bit hesitant, and as a result, I played a Derek Carr lineup, and this lineup was disastrous. Not only did I play Derek Carr, but I played McCaffrey over Connor, and so that cost me points as well. It's basically Carr and McCaffrey over Bortles and Connor from the very first lineup that I had. You see Robert Woods, you see Taiwan Taylor, and at the end of the day, that I was giving up a point in projection, and with these pivots, with these hedges that I typically try to do, I'm trying to keep that to half-point hedges when I'm considering 2v2s and things like that. I was giving up a full point at the quarterback spot, and it was a play that I made out of fear, and that's one that I'm not comfortable with. I was not super excited to play Derek Carr. I was making that play solely out of fear of too much Blake Bortles. That's a bad hedge. When you're hedging and you're making it out of plays that you think are good plays, that's fine. But to hedge off of a play that you don't think is a great play just because you're not as confident in the other one, I think that was a big mistake. So really frustrated with this one. This ended up being, a big loser. The first one was a big winner, and the second one basically broke even on the slate. So kind of broke even on FanDuel on the slate, on a slate where our projections mostly did well. Other things I could have done that would have improved my chances is Devontae Adams over Juju, but I really wasn't doing that. I was playing as much Pittsburgh as I could. I could have gotten off Taiwan, but those would have led me to 2 low 6,000s receivers instead of a 5 and a 7,200, and I don't know that I would have chosen any better there. I played Tyler Boyd in that one iteration. Maybe get on Kenny Golladay, who had a good game, but probably don't change a lot there. So ultimately, the profits were lost on this slate by not having confidence in Blake Bortles, who had a ton of outs because of his rushing ability. And that one, I was disappointed with myself at the end of the week. On DraftKings, I played 3 cash game lineups. Had 1 good lineup and 2 really bad ones. And looking back at DraftKings, and we'll look at our projections on DraftKings to kind of lead the way there. It was a really tough slate because I think there were lots of different ways to build, and we'll start at the quarterback position where, for us, Ben Roethlisberger was the highest projected score and the top value, followed by Aaron Rodgers. And while there's not a ton of dispersion amongst the quarterbacks, like 2 to 3 points here, there was enough value on the slate to kind of play however you wanted to play. And you see our top 5 or 6 values here. Most of these guys did pretty darn well. Roethlisberger was fine. Rodgers was great. Stafford was okay, but kind of ran bad with 2 one-yard touchdown runs. Bortles got there even though he was awful, but from a fantasy perspective, he was fine. Cam was fine. Kirk Cousins was fine. Russ Wilson was fine. So not a lot I could have done wrong at the quarterback position. I probably wasn't winning anything at the quarterback position. At running back, once again, we have this bigger dispersion where Christian McCaffrey, Melvin Gordon, James Conner, Todd Gurley, David Johnson, and then you get into Joe Mixon, Saquon Barkley, TJ Yeldon. We're all 2.5 plus values, and then everyone kind of fell off. Yeldon, because he was cheap at 5,600, made a big difference here. And so he ended up, and I knew we were conservative on Yeldon because we weren't sure. The Jags have done this thing in the past where on games Fournette is ruled out beforehand, Corey Grant has more of a role. Now that got evaporated early on because Corey Grant got hurt and is lost for the season. Now we don't have to worry about that. So I knew our Yeldon projection was a little bit more on the conservative side because I didn't know what to do with Corey Grant. And there was some upside to it if Yeldon acted the way he had in the last game that Fournette was out mid-game. So I was good with Yeldon. I was not playing Barkley or Mixon in cash on DraftKings. I was good with David Johnson because of the salary leaf, again, 6,300 here. Gurley and Gordon were very expensive and tough to get to, and I wanted to play McCaffrey and Connor everywhere. So I felt good about McCaffrey and Connor. At wide receiver, the values were a little bit more mixed by prices. You got the upper tier guys with Juju, Adam Thielen, Devontae Adams, and of that trio who are all priced, 200 apart, I had Juju, who was the worst of the trio. I still feel fine about that. I took the guy in the best offense, maybe not guaranteed the most targets, and maybe that's something I need to think through because these guys have higher market share of targets, but ultimately I was okay with that. Maybe could have diversified some there and it maybe save a lineup. Doug Baldwin was the salary relief guy who just torpedoed my lineups on this slate. At 5K, we had him projected really well. He played snaps. He ran routes. He just only got one target, and it was on a broken play like where Russ was flipping the ball out of bounds. I don't know what to do with that. He had 28% market share of targets the week before. You could say, yeah, he's coming off injury, and we don't know what Seattle's going to do, but I mean, he had 28% of market share of targets his first week back, so that's a play I couldn't have gotten away from, and that's a play that ultimately was going to sink me on this slate, and there's not much I can do. When you go lower, Marquez Valdez-Scantling is a guy who at 3,300 was just a barely positive value for us, and you see we gave him 15% market share of targets. We gave him over 8 yards per target and nearly a 70% reception rate, so we basically said, look, this guy's going to be decently efficient, but we don't know where the market share of targets is. Ultimately, I knew he was going to be really heavily owned, and that's one where I feel like I should have just eaten the chalk, even though there were other good value wide receivers, because, hey, it's Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball in a dome to a guy who's going to be on the field a ton. Even if he's not going to see the amount of targets you think, there's a lot of unknown here in this projection. And ultimately, my one Valdez-Scantling lineup ended up cashing. My other two did not. At tight end, we had Travis Kelce as a really strong value. And early in the week, I really wanted to get up to Travis Kelce. And then later in the week, I kind of just said, I can't figure it out. I can't quite get there. And so the punt that ended up being the most attractive for us was Jeff Hireman or Nick Vannett. I ended up playing Hireman. I knew Vance McDonald was going to be massively owned, and I played a little bit of him as chalk and felt kind of dirty about it. At defense, we had Philadelphia and Baltimore a little bit ahead of Kansas City and Cincinnati. These were big swings. I played Philadelphia, which was the weakest performer of the group, in 2 of the 3 lineups, and the other defenses all did great. So that was a tough one to overcome as well. But let's look at the lineups. The top scoring one was Ben Roethlisberger, James Conner, Christian McCaffrey, Marvin Jones Jr., Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Vance McDonald, TJ Yeldon, and Ravens D. Picked up a little bit on my Philly Ds with the Ravens D here. Had the big game from Yeldon, Connor McCaffrey. I felt so solid about the running backs this week, and that really did come through. On this lineup, I felt like I had enough to get up to Ben Roethlisberger because my upgrades on any of these wide receivers wasn't getting me a ton, and I wasn't quite getting up to Kelce. So I was in this weird mix where unless I got off Juju, I couldn't really get up to Kelce. And whatever I was getting down from Roethlisberger wasn't giving me that much in a lineup that I played like Valdez-Scantling. So this lineup cashed at 160, but the other 2 lineups did not. 133.9. This one is simply Taywan Taylor and Jeff Hireman in the Eagles D, and Baldwin over Marvin Jones, Valdez-Scantling, and Vance McDonald. And Taywan Taylor, I regret that play on DraftKings. I was already playing a ton of them on Fanduel. I didn't need to be this overexposed to a player on a shaky offense on the whole. This is a lineup where I should have nixed this lineup and just gone with the other one with the Valdez-Scantling. So that's one I felt regretful about. And then the last one was the Stafford lineup that I think this was our optimal at the end of the day. Hireman was disappointing, and Baldwin and Jones were just lineup sinkers. Marvin dropped another long touchdown. And, in retrospect, maybe you could say, hey, be careful playing guys that are just coming off injury. Or Marvin Jones was late added to the injury report, but we had seen Golden Tate the week before be a late added to the injury report, and there were no issues. And again, Marvin Jones dropped another 50-yard touchdown that if he has that on top of it, he has a 20-point DK point game, and everybody's saying he was a great play. Baldwin really ultimately sunk these lineups, and Stafford not being able to rack up yards because the game script got so funky with the 2 early touchdowns kind of sunk these lineups as well. But at the end of the day, I mean, I'm not really unhappy with any plays that I made here outside of the Taywan Taylor one. Hireman over Vance McDonald. I thought Vance, 1K more expensive for a guy with not that much of a projection advantage, was unnecessary. And I only played I only played a little bit of advance on this one team that ended up winning or cashing because I was so afraid of the chalk there. And ultimately, I wanted to play Hireman or Kelsey. I couldn't find my ways up to Kelsey. I think in retrospect, if I had forced Kelsey, I would have had to play this Marquez Valdez-Scantling guy, and probably would have had better lineups on the whole. But not a winning week for me. A little bit of a disappointing week on a week that I felt the projections did well. I just kind of landed on the wrong side of a couple of the key ones. Defense, I picked the weakest one, which was our top value out of the top 4 values that the other 3 did well. Wide receiver, Juju was our top value, but closely with Adam Thielen and Devontae Adams at the same price tag, and those guys smashed Juju. 10-plus point differences there. The Tywan Taylor versus the Marquez Valdez-Scantling, those types of things. So, not on the right side of coin flips this week, but I also I didn't feel as confident, and I didn't feel like I had as much time as I usually do on a given week to kind of think through a slate. So a little bit of a disappointing week for me, but as always, I'll be here every week to review the good, the bad, and the ugly. This week, more bad and ugly than good. We will be back next week, though, to review week 6. For those out there watching, I hope this is helpful to you guys in your process and understanding how I go about creating a few different cash game lineups on a site-by-site basis, and of course how to use the projections over at DailyRoto.com. So that'll do it for me, Drew Dinkmeyer from DailyRoto. Best of luck in all your games, everybody.